All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Danielle Dietrich. This is Diana Mitsuklas. We're here with the Student Press Law Center, and I'm basically just getting us started. So we're going to throw it straight over to Hadar.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to everyone for the next in our installments of the Student Press Law Center's ongoing webinar series on current issues that we are facing today in student journalism. My name is Hadar Harris, and I'm the Executive Director of the Student Press Law Center. This is one of an ongoing series of webinars that we're having to explore legal and ethical concerns for student journalists. And there can be few topics and more timely and more important and more sensitive than how to cover the burgeoning stories of sexual assault in American society. As you know, SPLC has a long history of supporting and defending student press in the United States. Founded in 1974, we're the only organization providing free legal help to student journalists and their advisors on issues related to censorship, copyright, digital rights, and freedom of information, among other things. And these days, one of the most pressing issues that we're hearing about and receiving inquiries around is the growing exposure of cases of sexual harassment and abuse on campus and in the community. Me too. Me too. Me too. Recently, we've heard many brave women and girls come forward to talk about heartbreaking sexual harassment and abuse cases at every level of our society, from movie producers and entertainment figures to politicians and political candidates, to teachers, school administrators, and others in positions of trust in our local communities. Yet, for journalists covering these stories, and for student journalists in particular, the reporting is sensitive and it's fraught with a variety of legal and ethical potential landmines. Today, we want to share with you stories of courageous student journalists and editors who've walked through these stories and provide some advice from SPLC's expert legal staff. We're then going to open it up to questions or comments that you may have. You can tweet at us at SPLC on Twitter, or as a comment on the Student Press Law Center Facebook page before we conclude. Again, this is the first of a two-part series of seminars on this topic. Our second webinar on Me Too will focus on strategies to investigate sexual abuse claims through Public Records Act and more. That's scheduled for Tuesday, December 5th at 10 a.m. We want you to mark your calendars. I want to let you know just as we get started. So let's talk about covering sexual abuse cases on campus. Joining us today, we're so grateful and fortunate to have Jamie Zega and Carly Lanick, the Fall 2017 Editor-in-Chief and the incoming Spring 2018 Editor-in-Chief, respectively, of the Indiana Student Daily. In September 2017, the Indiana Daily Student ran a four-part series called The System, which exposed issues of fairness and flawed process in Indiana University's system of investigating sexual assault cases. They're going to talk about what went into that reporting, the reactions they received, and the considerations they used in framing their stories. So I want to turn it over now to Jamie and Carly to talk a little bit about their series, their process, and some of the things they encountered along the way. Thanks a lot, Jamie and Carly.
Great. Thanks, Hadar. So as she said, I'm Jamie. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Indiana Daily Student. And
hi there, I'm Carly, and I'm currently the Investigations Editor here at the Indiana Daily Student.
This kind of started a year ago.
Yes.
More than a year ago.
Yes.
Sure,
yeah, I can walk you through it. So we obviously picked this story up before even seeing some of these recent revelations of the entertainment industry and politics. Something that led us to it was a series of daily stories about an office here at IU where the administrator who oversees cases of sexual assault reported by students was himself accused of sexual assault. Now, this administrator went through a series of investigations, some of those being university-based, some of them police-based, and was in these investigations cleared of guilt. There were never charges pressed, but it opened up this greater question to us: what happens when a student reports sexual assault at a university? It's a very different process than what you'd see in the criminal justice system. So we dove into kind of that question looking to better understand the policies and the procedures, but also to provide a human voice to look for the students that are actually going through it. And the way we did this took a lot of time and effort. These are obviously sensitive stories, and we wanted to allow students to approach us necessarily. We didn't want to come over as, overly aggressive, like you have to share this story. It's obviously something we recognize is very sensitive. So we took an approach of posting flyers on our campus, posting notices in our print products. We even, at one point, under the advice of some editors who've recently graduated, shared our own stories of sexual assault on Twitter, because we recognize that this is something that's, not unique to just students, but affects people even in our own newsroom. So upon doing that, we started to just have emails flood in of people with various interests, maybe just wanting to talk to someone, to full on wanting to share their story with their face, their video, and what they'd experienced. After we spoke with mainly women who had reported to the university, we recognized that these cases are not one-sided, that there's always someone else who's been accused of this, of this act. And what is it like to be someone sitting on the other side accused of sexual assault? So then we attempted to reach out to those students and found that it's very difficult for someone who's been accused of sexual assault to put their face and name to a story like that as well. So we spoke to one student anonymously, confirming his reports through communications with our university offices and through reports that had been filed at our school. And then we also spoke to attorneys who've represented students accused of sexual assault in these cases to provide more of a understand how they interact with the university office. And what we found ultimately on both sides of these cases is that students had very similar complaints, regardless of whether they were someone who had reported or been accused. So then we decided to kind of round out our series to take a look at how our university system compares to others. And this is maybe where this could be helpful for other students watching this webinar right now, is to take a look at your own policies and see, is what my university is doing par for the course of what others are doing? And it varies between schools. So we wanted to take a look and see if there were things other schools were doing in their systems that maybe we could implement here at IU, so that although this is kind of a very large and looming story that brings some very specific concerns to our student body, we wanted to be responsible and see if there were ways we could help provide some answers and possible solutions. This was something we modeled off of a series written by a great team at the Post and Courier called Till Death Do Us Part. They did something very similar in a final part of their investigative series. So that's kind of just a well-rounded view. I came into this reported through, I want to say the actual investigation series started in the fall of 2016. Jamie was named our editor shortly before we went to break last spring, going to summer break. So she can maybe speak more as to how she came to have this huge project in her semester as my editor.
Yeah, so Carly and I have been friends since our freshman year, lived on the same floor. We're both very involved at the IDS, obviously. And I knew she had been working on a project involving sexual assault, but I didn't really know all the details. And not even a week after I'd been named the editor for this semester, Carly and the professor whose class she had worked on the story in called me into their office and said, so we got this 20,000 word story for you. And at the plan, it was to run in about 5 parts, like a day in our daily paper. However, just before I was named editor-in-chief, we announced a change for this semester where we would be cutting our print production from 5 days a week into 2. So that was an immediate concern of ours, of this 5-part series, how we wanted to make that run. But then also the question that wasn't really a question in my mind, but the professor had asked me was, do you want to run this story? because there are editors, not just in the IDS's path, but in college journals, who might not want to take on something like this. And you know, until it came out, we really weren't sure how the administration would respond. You know, if it would become, you know, just this battle between the administration and us, or if they would just kind of let it happen and respond accordingly. So, you know, obviously Carly and I did everything to make sure that we got both sides. Carly met with the Title IX coordinator numerous times. We met with our provost a couple of times as well. And so that was just to make sure that we were all kind of, I don't know if I want to say on the same page, but making sure this wasn't just us kind of dropping this and saying, here you go.
Sure.
So
from a reporter standpoint, we clearly wanted to give them a chance to respond.
Right.
So, you know, after a year of reporting, we realized that there are some very, not just that these are concerns of a few students, but we interviewed upwards of a dozen students who were all telling us very similar things about what had happened in their experiences at IU.
Right.
So we wanted to give them a chance to respond to, you know, if there's a way to assure students that this is the rationale behind why a student might have this concern, this is what we might be doing going forward. We wanted to give them that opportunity. And then, as Jamie mentioned, we knew this story was going to carry some weight, and we wanted them to be prepared.
Right. So that was one of the main editorial responsibilities that I took on. And then also this whole how we were going to run it, because this was something that we didn't want people to miss. So that was also, it was kind of determined before I had been named editor that it wouldn't run in the spring. So in a way, it was kind of just put on me, like, you know, this story is here. You don't have to run it, but it's here. And so we decided, you know, from April, we were already making decisions about when we wanted it to run. So we wanted it to run early in the semester. We didn't want to hold it all the way until December because laws and policy can change, and it did.
On the federal scope,
on the federal scope. And then also we wanted, as previous reporting that we had done last year showed, the red zone is a period early. It's the first month of college when freshmen are much more likely to just go through any sort of assault experience or sort of, you know, the drinking. It's a new environment. They're much more susceptible to situations like these. And so we wanted to make sure that not just freshmen, but everyone on campus had a look at this early. And then too, before, you know, the end of the semester when these stories drop, it's the end of the semester, so people just kind of forget about them. And we didn't want people to forget about this. We wanted people to read it and to interact with it.
And again, to give the university a chance to respond while students are here on campus.
Right. And so also, you know, as I said, we wanted to make sure it got out before any federal guidance changed or before the university changed its policy. And we were actually very thankful we got it out when we did. As the day after we finished running, Betsy DeVos announced her changes to the federal guidance.
Sure.
Sure.
That and this is also another reason this is especially an important story on college campuses right now is the federal guidelines that universities like IU have to meet when considering these cases did recently change. And there's a lot of questions in the Title IX community about what this will mean moving forward. But in the way it played out here, we wound up, our structure changed throughout the drafting process, and with our print changes as well, we decided on a structure of running 4 parts successively each day of that week online, and then the total story in one 12-page print edition that ran in our Thursday print paper, and then the Friday of that week is when federal announcements came. So it was definitely an interesting time for this story, and something that I think I've been excited to see other schools delve into and tackle a little bit, because it's not unique to IU. And so that's why we're really excited to be here today, is to explore a little bit of that. It's something the IDS here at IU has had a long history of covering sexual assault. So I was very grateful to those students who came before me who were tackling stories about the red zone, about how you define consent even. It's a very nuanced topic. So I was able to work with some of those reporters and draw from that experience reporting in my own. And then to follow how other schools have covered this as well has been very helpful. But You know, if you asked me a year ago, I may have said there's no way I'll be able to write this big 4-part series. So I guess I'm here today to tell other students out there, you can do something like this. It takes a lot of hard work and dedication, but it's very important. It's a story worth telling. So if you all have any questions for us, we'd love to answer those.
I have a couple of questions as people are sending in the questions that they might have. Are you hearing an echo? I hope not.
A little bit, but we've got you.
Okay. So it sounds like you've outlined, you know, some long-term planning, careful reporting, corroboration, verification, looking at all views, knowing your audience, targeting the timeline and the process for how you were going to roll the story out. And really being thoughtful about the impact that you were going to have with this story, all those things combining in a way that has made this series so important and so impactful in your own community. It is a model for really great student journalism nationally. I'm wondering two things. One is in terms of some of the roadblocks that you may have encountered along the way, because this is not easy reporting and this is really sensitive. And so I'm wondering about roadblocks that you might have had. The other is the reactions that you got. So if you could address those two things, that would be great.
Sure. I think as far as we could tackle reactions first, because that one is a lot shorter.
Quickly, yes.
So, you know, we knew with this story coming out that it would open us up to a lot of reactions, whether it be calls, emails, tweets, anything. And really, we pretty much got a lot of positive reactions. And
we actually had a plan in place. I was in the newsroom, I don't know, 8 or 9 that morning. The very first part ran, expecting a flood of calls. Really, the feedback we got was positive. We did put a plan in place, looking at our commenting policy and things like that, because we know whenever you do open a story up about sexual assault, there's always the potential for just some really nasty, unfounded comments. So that was a discussion ahead of time, but we really didn't see any of that. And I think a lot of that goes back to our reporting. We made sure, I mean, these were all questions we were thinking about months in advance of, you know, if we're telling this story, let's make sure we're really doing it in a way that, you know, is not opening up those kinds of comments. And of course, you're always going to get some that are, you know, nasty and not necessarily rational, but we were really lucky in that we didn't see that.
Right.
And as far as your first question goes, I guess difficulties in the reporting process, you know, trying to find students who are accused of sexual assault was particularly hard. And I touched on that earlier. We kind of addressed it in a way of, let's see if we can speak to some attorneys who've been involved in these cases. And that was really helpful because they could speak on behalf of not just one student, but many clients they've represented. One of those attorneys was someone who had previously worked at IU. So she could kind of give us insight as to how the office worked as someone who had previously been working for that department and then moving into the other side of how she's represented students. Another way we kind of looked to address that, to shore up any you know, concerns that we weren't getting the full picture on the other side of things, we looked to lawsuits that had been filed. And if you've ever taken a look at one of these big federal lawsuits, gender discrimination ones, especially, they're incredibly detailed. They lay out exactly what, you know, someone thought had happened. And some of those lawsuits were, you know, more of an anonymous Jane Doe lawsuit or John Doe lawsuit where students weren't named. And then several students were named. And we made every attempt to reach out to folks when we did see that a lawsuit was filed. Some of them were ones that we had previously reported on, so that helped. And then I would say, as far as anything else, maybe the largest complication we had right before print, we did have one student come out and say to us, you know, I'm a little uncomfortable with sharing my story. I've seen some of this play out. I'm not sure I want to be a part of it. And this was a source that I'd been in communication with for, you know, many weeks leading up to the series. So even after trying to sit, you know, give her a call, talk through some of her concerns, she still wasn't sure. And we said, look, this is a sensitive story. This is your story. We don't want to run with anything if you're not comfortable with it. So we were lucky in the sense that we had, you know, several other students who were felt very strongly that they wanted to come out with their story, that we didn't have a problem with retracting her part of it. And those are just kind of tough editorial decisions you have to make. But in recognizing a sensitive topic like this, we wanted to be, we wanted to keep that relationship with our sources and know that trust is still there, and that, if there's something you're uncomfortable with, let's talk about it. So
I think that actually great segue into Mike Keaston coming on board and talking with us for a few minutes about some of the legal and ethical ramifications of reporting on these kinds of stories. Again, I want to congratulate you and everyone at the Indiana Student Daily for your amazing reporting. We have a link to the series up on our website, I believe, or on the YouTube channel, and so people can access that. They can also Google it and find it. Jamie has to go to class, but Carly's going to stick around to answer some questions afterwards if we have questions coming in. But again, I want to congratulate you. Mike, I want to hand it over to you. Mike Keaston is our senior legal counsel at Splc. He's been with Splc in one shape or another since he was just a baby intern for us back in the day. And he is the voice behind the legal hotline. Often if you call us and have an inquiry, Mike is the person who answers the phone and talks you through various issues. So we want to benefit from his great knowledge around many of the legal and ethical considerations of these kinds of cases. Mike, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Hadar, and good morning from where I am, and good afternoon to other folks. And I just want to join Hadar in congratulating Jamie and Carly and the whole IDS staff on just a fantastic series. Every time folks have looked into this issue, kind of these campus judicial systems. I mean, it's eye-opening what's been found, and this certainly was no exception. Actually, back in when kind of the whole access to campus court information and campus sexual assault came up in a big way back in the early 90s, the New York Times actually did a story, and they were able to kind of get behind the closed doors of the University of Georgia campus reporting system. And it was just, it was eye-opening. I mean, you really couldn't believe that some of the things that were taking place in, an American forum. And honestly, reading your story, a lot of the things haven't changed there. And so I congratulate you for bringing this forward. It's not easy reporting, but it's important reporting. So I guess I'll start with just kind of affirming that whole notion that this is not easy reporting. This is probably the most difficult sort of reporting that student journalists take on. Sexual assault, sexual harassment reporting is difficult by nature. I mean, things happen behind closed doors. These are he said, she said, or he said, he said, but there are situations where there's not a lot of corroborating evidence, not a lot of witnesses to come forward in many cases, and so it's very difficult reporting. And one of the things that I talk with students about, and we've seen this, the Me Too stuff that's come out after Harvey Weinstein has really sparked something with student media in particular. I've seen an explosion in the number of calls that I'm getting and requests for help from students that are coming forward with their stories and asking for assistance. And that's one thing I do want to, my comments today are going to be fairly brief, and that's intentional because I really, these cases are, like I said, they're tough reporting. They're very fact specific, and these are the stories that I do want to hear from you, or make sure that you have somebody that you can talk with, because again, they're important stories to tell, but they're also the stories that can get you into some legal hot water if you're not careful. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, just kind of ways to avoid some of that legal hot water. The first thing, so it comes down to there's kind of three things that come up with these stories. The first is what information can we get, and that is going to be the subject of our second webinar on this topic on December 5th, as Hadar mentioned. We're going to talk about the Federal Clarity Act and state laws and just how they intersect regarding access to information and documents and records and things like that. So what information can we get is the first question, and then what information can we publish? And then a third question, it's an important question, is what information should we publish? Because, not always you have a legal right to publish things. It doesn't always mean that you should publish that stuff. And so, those are the sorts of things that we'll talk about when you give me a call. One of the very first questions I have for folks, though, is this an appropriate story for covering the issue of sexual assault and sexual harassment, or the actual incident? If you decide that you're going to cover the incident, what I mean by that, if you're going to talk about what happened, if you're going to kind of unpack the he said, she said allegations that are taking place, that's a whole different sort of reporting and a whole different sort of risk level, really, than covering the issue of sexual assault and sexual harassment and how it's handled on campus or in high schools. One of the things I think that I look for in determining, what the appropriate path is what sort of documentation that you have, and where is it in the process? Where you have a situation where something is actually, gone to court and there are legal documents to cite, or even where it's gone to a campus judicial system, and there may be some documentation there. That's one of the things that can be very, very helpful in reporting these stories and provide a great deal of legal cover. Unfortunately, I recognize this, that means that a lot of specific incidents of sexual assault probably can't be reported right now. There is a fairly high bar. These are very serious charges, and if you're going to report it, you need to be right, and you need to have the evidence to show that you're right if you were to be challenged. Because these are the sorts of things that, because of the nature of the charges, they can ruin lives. When you are accused of sexual harassment, sexual assault, it can ruin your professional, your personal life, and so if there is any chance of challenging the reporting that you've done, this is the sort of case where that sort of thing will happen. So you want to always be thinking in the back of your mind, do we have the evidence, and do we have proof of that evidence to back it up? So yeah, are you going to report either the issue or the incident? If you're going to report the issue, one of the ways that we talk about doing that is making sure that you don't identify individuals regarding the specific incidents. Libel is the big question, is the big concern that we're usually trying to avoid in these situations. And libel, for those of you, most of you already know this, but libel is simply a false statement of fact that seriously harms someone's reputation. So sexual harassment, sexual assault certainly meets that standard if you get it wrong. If you get the story wrong, you definitely have seriously harmed someone's reputation. So one of the ways that you can avoid libel is by not identifying someone, by simply withholding, disguising their identity, again, talking more about the issue than those specifically involved in the issue. The problem with using the no identification strategy as your way to avoid legal problem is that it's tricky. One of the ways you can do it is simply not use their names, of course, but there's a lot of ways to identify people that aren't necessarily tied to their names. You can identify a person, obviously, by a title. You can identify a person by their description, by their friends. One of the problems we see a lot is if a couple, if the he and the she, or the he and the he are a couple, and the community knows that these people are related, you can tie the two together, and then you have you have identified somebody, and that person is a potential plaintiff. So if you're going to use this withholding names or disguising identities as a way to tell the story, just make sure that you pull back far enough that you're not that you're avoiding unnecessary descriptions, that you're mindful of pictures. Like one of the things I noticed here that we would have talked about had the IDS looked to no identification as one of their strategies is, I'm just going to show this. This is one of the pieces, one of the images they used on the for their piece. And and I don't think that they're trying to disguise this person's identity here, but one of the things I'd ask about, you haven't identified them by name, but is this jewelry? Is this distinctive? Is this something that they always wear? If they had a ring on or something like that, even something even more distinctive, that could be something that could identify somebody. So you do want to be, you do want to be a little bit careful about the identification part. The other part you want to be careful about, though, is there's an issue called group libel. And sometimes when you're trying to pull back far enough so that you're not identifying anybody in particular, you can accidentally identify a group of individuals. For example, if the assailant in a sexual assault case had been on the football team, you're probably okay in saying that this person was a member of the football team. Most football teams, are fairly big, 60, 70 people, something like that. On the other hand, if you were to identify the member or the person that had committed the assault as a member of the tennis team, you might have a problem, because in many schools, certainly high schools, the tennis team is maybe 9 or 10 people. And if you simply say that, a person on the tennis team is the person that was involved in the situation, you have probably, potentially libeled each member of the tennis team, because they are so closely tied to the tennis team. People would start to wonder, is this the person? Is this the guy that we're talking about? So again, very, very tricky sorts of issues come up when we're trying to disguise identity. And that's one of the things, I'm happy to help you with, or somebody else can help you with, just to make sure that that's not going to be a problem. The other thing that I see a fair share in these sorts of stories is there is some criticism of the system. When somebody goes and reports what's happened to them, very often, certainly that I'm seeing in the stories that I'm looking at, the response has been less than wonderful. I mean, there's been a lot to be, a lot of improvement could be had in these situations. And I think that's certainly what they found in Indiana. But remember, every time that you are criticizing the system, very often you're also criticizing a specific individual. And so even if you're not identifying by name, there probably is a particular person, your Title IX officer, or somebody in charge of the campus judicial system, or somebody at the high school level that is responsible for taking for hearing these sorts of claims. If you are going to be criticizing the system, you need to realize you have identified somebody, and attacking somebody's competence in their profession is also one of those red flag libel categories that you have to be careful about. If you're going to attack somebody's competence, professional competence, you have to be right. If you're not right, that is something that can seriously harm their reputation and support a libel claim. So be mindful of that. Just kind of general advice that we always go through. We go through a story and we eliminate any sort of unnecessary details. If individuals are just kind of named kind of as an aside or as a way to describe things more, very often we're going to strip those out. Not always, but sometimes. I mean, those are potential plaintiffs. And so, just being really careful about everything that's in the story. And we kind of go through these things line by line is important. I guess the other thing is always talk to all sides. These are difficult conversations. As Carly and Jamie just talked about, they these are very sensitive, and they bring out a lot of emotion on all sides here, and so it can be difficult. It can be difficult to call the person accused of sexual assault or the person that is trying these cases and having those conversations. But you have to. I mean, this is advanced level reporting, and there are certain things that you have to do. One of the things is you have to give, all sides the opportunity to present their side of the story. I guess lastly, the last thing I'll say is, in America, one of the things that we have is a system that says that you can be sued for libel. Pretty much anybody can sue anybody for anything in America, but you can't be successfully sued for libel unless you as a reporter have somehow acted unreasonably. And so the entire time that you're putting this story together, one of the things that I'm going to be talking with you about, and that I want you to keep in the back of your mind at all times, is just, does this make sense? Am I doing everything that a reasonable reporter should do, such as, talking to all sides and gathering documents and reading those documents. As Carly talked about, these, some of these Title IX filings, they are complicated, and there's a lot of legal jargon there. And, when you report, just this past week, I was talking to some students, their story had talked about how the school had gone through and looked at this, and they investigated the issue, and at the end of the time their story said that the student had been found guilty, when in fact, when you actually read the documents, basically what the document said is that they had been that the charges were founded, and saying that the charges were founded is a much different thing from saying that the person is actually guilty. And it's important to note that in your reporting. And so just being reasonable, doing good journalism, talking with folks like me or folks that can help you out, that's what you got to do. But this is important reporting. This is some of the more important reporting that I've seen in the 25 plus years that I've been with the Splc.
Great, thanks, Mike. It is courageous reporting, and it is important reporting, and it is something that we hope is done sensitively and well. Thank you, Carly, for coming back on. I was just going to ask you to turn your camera back on. We've got time for one question. You can unmute yourself too, Carly. And maybe both of you can take this. This is from Donnie, or at least that's his Twitter handle. I'm assuming that it is. How should publications balance survivors' needs for privacy and anonymity with ethical obligations to cite sources? This is one of those things that kind of comes down to the very basics of this kind of really sensitive reporting. Maybe, Carly, you can talk a little bit about how you encountered that. Mike, you talked about libel stuff. If there's anything else you want to say around that, you guys can respond. So Carly, I'm gonna shove it over to you first.
Sure, yeah, I'd love to speak to that. In our reporting, we spent a year, and Mike touched on so many of the issues, the same things we came across in our reporting. And part of that is it takes time to get through these cases and to really make sure you're doing the groundwork and getting things right. When you're looking at cases of sexual assault, putting a face and a name to these stories is so important. I actually read a great op-ed in the New York Times yesterday about this. It's so much easier to believe someone when they're coming out with their face and their name. And that's not to say you don't want to believe them, but if, for instance, in these entertainment industry scandals, if you're going to say, for example, Harvey Weinstein, you're going to accuse him of sexual assault, but you're not using your name, it's so much easier to sweep that accusation under the rug. So we made that a priority of getting students comfortable with that. But part of how we did that was, this is more than just sitting down with someone once. Over the course of a year, we met with our sources many times. Some of them were living, across the state. Some of them had moved away from Indiana and different states. So it was, setting up regular phone calls, Skyping with them. Our approach to working with people wasn't even to say like, hey, let's do an interview. We always started with, let's sit down and talk about talking. We'll introduce you to us. You can get to know us a little bit. You can ask us any questions you have about our story. And if at the end of that meeting you feel comfortable with this, then let's move forward and let's talk about how you can help us. But at the same time, we had, maybe 4 or 5 women in particular who felt comfortable coming forward with their names and faces. There are many who didn't. These are very difficult cases to talk about, and many people along, the experience of reporting sexual assault and even moving on after going through a hearing are in different places with how much they want to share. So we still met with those people. We took their notes. We called them and met with them regularly. But their experiences and what they shared with us was more foundational to our reporting. So a lot of those students who had things to share could corroborate what we had heard from other students. So when you hear, for example, my frustration with a system is that I can't go in and take copies of my file from an office. When you hear that, from 2 students who give their faces and names, that's powerful. It puts a face to the story. But when you hear it from 12 people total, you can say, maybe we're not going to name all 12 of these people, but we've heard it from them. So it is an obligation, and it's difficult. These are conversations I was having with Jamie. I was having with other editors in the newsroom. I had great mentors in the media school who walked me through some of this. It's not a decision you make overnight. It takes time, but I think it comes from an ongoing conversation with your sources and saying, this is why this is important to us, but let us know where you're at and what we can do to make you more comfortable.
And the one thing I'd add to that real quickly here is that one of the best sources for ethical questions like the ethical issues is the Pointer Institute, pointer.org. They actually have a checklist, I think, when to name a sexual assault victim, and it goes through things to think about. So luckily we're not having to reinvent the wheel here. People have really thought about this, and it's important to think about.
That's great, and it actually provides me with a perfect segue. We are at the end of our time, but there are so many different resources available, both on the SPLC website and, as Mike just outlined, on the pointer.org website and other places. And there are even more discussions that we need to have. Please use us, call us, follow us on social media, send us your thoughts and ideas, and use Mike's expertise as part of the legal hotline. You can find the way to make an appointment with him or to call us for urgent calls through the SPLC website. For those of you who are going to be at the JEA National Convention in Dallas this weekend, high school students who may be watching, please come and find us at the SPLC table. And you can also join us for one of the 6 workshops that we'll be presenting at the convention, including a session on Friday morning at 9 o'clock on libel law for student media, which directly relates to our discussion today. You can meet Mike in person and me. Thank you to Danielle Dietrich, SPLC's Publication Fellow, for her hard work in setting up this webinar and our webinar series, and to Diana Mitsu-Kloss, SPLC's Director of Engagement, for her support and vision as we move this ahead. And again, please join us on December 5th for the 2nd installment of these series. We got a number of questions coming in through Twitter and through Facebook on how to get records, how to deal with the difference between the Clery Act and Title IX, and those are the types of topics that we'll be just exploring on December 5th for our next webinars. If you know people who would gain from watching this webinar, we'll have it posted soon on the SPLC's YouTube channel. You can use it. Please use it and please promote us. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to follow SPLC on Twitter at SPLC, on Facebook, and bookmark the SPLC.org website for the many questions that come up along the way. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you, Carly. Thank you, Mike. Thank you to Jamie, who's at class, and we will see you all soon. Thanks again.